Hello, my name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar, where every other week I invite fascinating people to share their stories on how can we make cities that are more equitable, sustainable, and fun, so that everyone will be able to live healthier and happier. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, and for the last 26 years, I've been living in Toronto, Canada, where 20 years ago, I created 880 cities, a simple but powerful concept. What if everything we did in our cities had to be great for an 8-year-old and for an 80-year-old as indicators? Then it would be good for everyone. We need to stop building cities as if everyone was 30-year-old and athletic. As I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities in all continents, and one of the ways of giving back are these bi-weekly webinars. Today, we have a fascinating and urgent topic, retrofitting suburbia for urgent challenges. And the guest is Ellen Dunham-Jones, who is the head of the master's program at Georgia Tech. And she has written books and has provided consultancy work and has helped transform cities in multiple areas. Ellen, thanks for accepting the invitation. Please tell us about yourself and how to retrofit suburbia so that it's going to be better for everyone.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Gil. Let me share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I am really delighted to share my research on retrofitting suburbia and hopefully spark attendees' imaginations about how all the aging, parking lot dominated suburban property types can be retrofitted to address challenges that their communities were never designed for. My co-author, June Williamson, and I have published 2 award-winning books on the subject, primarily focused on US examples. But sadly, the rest of the world is also sprawling out more than up. And to the growing global middle class that aspires, many of whom aspire to American-style suburban villas, our message is, don't emulate our old model. Look at the suburban retrofits. So I continue to maintain the database that June and I started. I promise not to show you all 2,500 examples in the database, but it might feel like it. So first, I want to clarify, what do I mean by suburban? This isn't about municipal distinctions between cities and suburbs. I'm interested in how urban versus suburban form performs. Most cities have plenty of suburban form that, in my opinion, should be retrofitted. And there are also plenty of older suburbs that have a couple of blocks of good urban form that should be preserved and extended. In the simplest terms, post-war suburban form is typically boxes surrounded by flat-ish space, either lawns or parking lots. Green space mostly just serves as a buffer, separating buildings and and then streets are tree-like networks of trunks, think of the highways, arterials, think of the branches, and cul-de-sacs as the twigs. Urban form is typically boxes that front sidewalks. Parking is either behind, beneath, or non-existent. Green spaces are public parks framed by and connecting buildings, and street networks form small-ish walkable blocks, often gridded. Now, I won't read all of the details in this slide about what's driving the retrofitting of suburbia, but suffice it to say that the 1950s suburb of single-family homes, stay-at-home moms, and standalone shopping centers and office parks no longer serves today's changing demographics and market, even though, frankly, we're still basically building, sprawling with more and more of that same 1950s model. But that model doesn't generate enough tax revenue to repair its aging infrastructure and schools. We need density to increase the tax revenue of a lot of suburbs that really can't deal with getting old. The good news is that it's precisely the vast amount of dead and dying commercial properties that are the new opportunity sites for suburbs to address contemporary challenges, disrupt automobile dependence, improve public health, support an aging population, leverage social capital for equity, compete for jobs, and add water and energy resilience. And the suburbs, nobody was really thinking about these issues. And yet these are pretty top of mind. And I would include affordability, certainly in the equity concerns. Together, these challenges and changing market forces are driving the three main strategies of retrofitting suburbia, which are simply either redevelopment, re-inhabitation or adaptive reuse, and re-greening. And literally, there are just thousands. In particular, as I focused on mostly US and Canadian properties, but there are examples certainly around the world. We just need more scholars even focusing on more of them. So job one is to reduce dependence on the automobile. All of the other challenges cascade from this one. Sadly, the suburban landscape has been designed to require us to drive everywhere. Yet nationally in the US, more than half of trips are 3 miles or less and could be an easy bike, scooter, or walk if, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, if we had sidewalks and bike lanes. Yet we don't. So in blue, on this slide, I list the most common retrofit strategies to reduce dependence on the car. And, in our books, June and I show all the examples of all of these. But today, I'm going to just start with an example of a road diet and the somewhat counterintuitive impacts of reducing space for cars. So this is the Boulevard in Lancaster, California, almost 2 hours east of Los Angeles in the very hot, dry Antelope Valley. This is a community that loves its cars. Before the retrofit, TripAdvisor's big thing to see when you visit Lancaster is their Civic Musical Highway. It's graded with rumble strips so that if you drive that portion at exactly 55 miles per hour, it sounds like the overture to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, sort of. But the images I'm showing here this is Lancaster's Main Street, which, like many small towns, was basically decimated during the heyday of shopping malls in the 1970s. The town's first response was to widen the road, make it easier for people to get to shops. But all that really did was speed up how fast drivers zipped past them. More recently, they downsized a 9-block length of road from 5 lanes to 5 traffic lanes with the turn lane to 2. Put the parking on permeable pavers in the middle, in between street trees and street lights. They reduced the speed limit from 45 to 20, and they removed all the traffic lights from those 9 intersections. You'd think it would be a disaster, and plenty of traffic experts said it would be. But in fact, when cars are moving at 50 miles an hour, they have to be pretty far apart. You slow them to 20, they can actually snug up pretty close to each other. And you actually get more throughput of cars at the slower speed. And by making it an attractive destination, the boulevard has attracted retailers back, added new development, increased tax revenues, cooled the hot desert temperatures, and become a lively event space. It also reduced car crashes and only increased travel time less than half a minute because cars aren't wiggling so much. Now, so scaling up, the Pike District, about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., is a very ambitious effort to transfer trips from highway to bus and rail over a 4-mile stretch of the 8 to 10 lane Rockville Pike. Rail runs parallel to already, that was already in place, parallel to the highway. But the stations in this part of the system are underused because you get out and it's just pretty miserable to walk on a highway right next to 8 lanes of right next to a highway. So the first phase of this 4-mile retrofit is the 400-acre plan shown in the middle of the slide. Property owners were invited by the county to discuss that the county wanted to make the area more walkable. And those owners knew that they were getting much higher rents in walkable parts of the DC market. So they agreed not only to allow the county to build a walkable public street network on their private land. Every one of those dotted red lines in that middle plan, those dotted lines are new public streets being built on private land. The owners of the properties also agreed to help pay for it in exchange for the right to build much more densely. In fact, up to 30 stories, though most of them have not done that. Now, the blue oval in the plan and is illustrated on the 2 left side images. And that's the first increment of the first phase of this redevelopment. The top on the left shows the 30-acre strip mall as it was, and below its redevelopment as of 2018 with dense mixed-use urban form, lots of attention to solar and stormwater, and great streetscape that rewards the pedestrian eye. As the street network gets built out and local trips are redistributed off the highway onto the new local streets, the county plans to put the highway on a road diet, down to 6 lanes with wider sidewalks and dedicated bus rapid transit lanes in the middle to extend to the rail. The project slowed some during the pandemic, but it met its car trip reduction targets and is continuing the process for 4 miles with the ultimate goal of creating a linear rail and bus served corridor city. So that one's impressive. California is also focusing on underperforming commercial corridors and now allows by right redevelopment with infill affordable housing regardless of local zoning. Peter Calthorpe, who advocated for the law, wants to further enhance performance with fleets of on-demand electric autonomous shuttle buses on those corridors. Because in that case, all of that new housing could be built car-free and itself be more affordable to the developers that they could pass on to the residents and truly connect affordable housing to affordable transportation. He estimates in the Bay Area alone, converting these commercial corridors to what he calls grand boulevards could provide almost 1.4 new housing units in a state that desperately needs more housing and more affordable housing. Dozens of trail-oriented developments are also going car light, if not fully car free. In highly car-oriented Atlanta, where I live, a 22-mile rails to trails loop has triggered significant adaptive reuse and redevelopment and regreening of former industrial properties and parking lots. On the East Side Trail, new office buildings get Manhattan rents from tech companies. And MailChimp surveyed their employees and found that 30% of those high-tech employees were walking or biking to work and said they'd quit if the company moved off the trail. So the company built the new office building shown in the middle of this slide. But the city was initially very unprepared for just how popular the trail-oriented development would be, and how much it has increased nearby property values, such that this part of the Beltline now is very much a symbol of green gentrification. And that leads us to the next challenge, leveraging social capital for equity. So again, in blue, lots of strategies here. I do just want to really emphasize that in strong markets where redevelopment is most likely to succeed, we need to always include diverse building types and housing types, and especially affordable housing. In weaker markets where redevelopment may not has a harder time of getting financing and succeeding, reinhabitation with social infrastructure is often just what a community needs. And regreening, in my opinion, should occur in every retrofit, both in terms of providing inclusive spaces for gathering and in terms of reducing urban heat island and pollution impacts, which tend to be greatest in low-income neighborhoods and certainly are not equitably distributed. So this retrofit of a dead mall in Austin, Texas, integrates all three strategies. A community college bought and re-inhabited the mall, providing training for the middle wage jobs that are sorely needed to rebuild the suburban middle class. They partnered with a developer to build mixed-use commercial and residential buildings on the mall's former parking lots. And they regreened some of the parking lots into parks, including one that honors the site of a former freed slaves encampment. So in addition to building social capital and honoring equity, the site meets additional challenges by being at a new light rail station and incorporating a carbon-reducing thermal energy storage system. There's just so much to learn and so much to learn from some of these really great retrofits. This example is at a much smaller scale, but it shows the importance of recognizing local small businesses as important social infrastructure. A nonprofit in California bought this strip mall in an underinvested neighborhood about to get a new streetcar line. They wanted to get ahead of gentrification and build affordable housing on the entire site. But when they met with the community members said, "Oh no, that's our mercado, that's our laundromat, we need those." So they kept the retail, added a small park, and only built on top of the parking lots and the gas station. And a real win-win for all. Now, while most of the densification retrofits, like those I've been showing, are on commercial properties, but more cities are rezoning single-family only areas to allow accessory dwelling units and missing middle housing, as in this example, also from Atlanta. In this example, on the upper left, the two low-rise homes there are the original two houses. They were just one-story homes of two lots next to each other. Those were the local firm converted those one-story homes into duplexes, then added two tall, skinny duplexes in between them, as well as 4 ADUs built behind them and 2 very small guest houses. All of them share a communal yard, a barbecue pit, a raised garden bed, and a bike repair shed. The existing mature trees were all preserved. They did all this without needing a single new variance, single variants because ADUs were being allowed, and the number of households on the two lots increased sevenfold. The lack of on-site parking kept rents attainable. Folks can park on the street, and all leased up very quickly to a mix of young adults and downsizing seniors eager to stay in the neighborhood. And that's a good segue to the next challenge: supporting an aging population. The suburbs were initially designed, certainly post-war in Northern America, post-World War II, they were designed primarily for young families with a car. Today, 2/3 of suburban households in the US do not have kids in them. Those once young parents are now empty nesters, most of whom shouldn't still be driving. On the one hand, this has created a need for retrofitting older suburban neighborhoods into lifelong communities that include smaller homes, a walkable mix of uses, and offer alternatives to driving. It's also resulted in a market for new kinds of senior retirement communities, as in this example of a dead mall redeveloped into a senior housing anchored mixed-use town center. Its town green, grocery, hotel, and shops connect to the existing main street of the small town of Wayzata, and encourage interaction between the seniors and the rest of the community. Nice side note, while the mall that had been on the site had destroyed the wetland that it was built on and dumped toxic runoff into the lake for decades off its parking lot, the redevelopment invested in underground basins to ensure zero runoff in the future. In the process, they installed geothermal pipes to heat the sidewalks in winter to reduce the seniors' chance of slippery falls. The senior housing sold out immediately and has been very successful, but this is an expensive place to live. However, there are plenty of examples of buildings being adapted into much more affordable senior housing, such as the reuse of a motel on the left, the reuse of a small office building in the middle, and even the reuse of a Mies van der Rohe designed ultra-modernist gas station outside of Montreal as a joint teen and senior center. So re-inhabiting existing buildings saves a great deal of embodied carbon, but we need to do more. As this image of Philadelphia's historic streams before and after suburbanization shows, the suburbs were not designed with environmental sustainability, let alone climate change, in mind. Again, on this slide, I cover lots of important strategies here, and the water ones are becoming increasingly mainstream. I'm still not seeing as much regreening or renewable energy implementation as I'd like. But the good news is that anything we do to reduce energy use also reduces water use and vice versa. But I really just want to emphasize how much we need more regreenings. This one shows some of the many benefits. In 1970, a mall was built in downtown Meriden, Connecticut, right on top of a creek. That was fairly common at the time. The culverts failed in the 90s and led to devastating back-to-back floods in the working class downtown. Today, the mall and the culverts have been demolished, the creek has been daylit, and the site is a stormwater park. Most of the time, it's a dry and grassy park, but it's designed a bit like a bathtub and holds the stormwater for over 225 downtown properties that have now been removed from the floodplain. That has enabled both public housing and the local train station to qualify for renovations, and the downtown has attracted new market rate housing. And that's actually something we find with most of the regreenings. Well-designed parks and streetscaping trigger new investment across all kinds of markets. This has also been the case in Mesa, Arizona, where rain gardens and wide sidewalks have reduced urban heat island and irrigation while calming traffic and triggering private sector redevelopment. And even much more modest regreenings, like these microforests, can have significant environmental and health impacts. And community volunteers can replace lawns, parking lots, or small plazas with dense native trees, shrubs, and grasses in just a couple of days. On the energy side, one of the leading retrofits examples is this redevelopment of an airport in Austin, Texas. All the housing is built to be solar ready and be part of the microgrid and advanced battery storage system. At the same time, the hospital and the Main Street buildings are part of a highly efficient district energy plant. These energy cost savings combine with water cost savings by design. So the houses are required to have porches that help reduce solar heat gain. They're all on very small lots that reduce the land and irrigation costs. Only the lawns are really only allowed as shared lawns where they're irrigated with recycled water. Miller also has a very innovative, affordable subsidy program using real estate transaction fees. 0.25% of every real estate sale in perpetuity on this 700-acre site goes into a fund where it supports secondary gap mortgages for low-income households. All of this was possible because the city owned the land and issued a request for proposals, soliciting only those developers interested in building an affordable, green, job-rich community. I'm seeing more and more cities become similarly proactive in retrofitting larger properties, often doing designs ahead of putting out the request for proposals. And in one case, in Westminster, Colorado, the city itself is actually serving as the master developer, where it's redeveloping its dead mall. But then, so the next challenge is competing for jobs. Suburbia has long been the engine propelling the white middle class. Now that the middle class is shrinking, suburbs are increasingly bifurcated between strong markets with high wages and rapidly accelerating home values and gentrification versus weaker markets of stagnant growth. In the strong markets, there are over 150 office parks and corporate campuses that are right now being infilled with mixed uses where walkable urbanism becomes the new amenity to attract digitally savvy workers. In the weaker markets, jobs are more likely to be created by re-inhabiting underperforming commercial buildings with services and incubators for entrepreneurs. Sometimes, as in my next case study, adaptive reuse for creative entrepreneurs ignites the market. If my students have to go work in an office park, this is the one they'd be happy to both live and work in. A former taxi distribution and repair site located between a rail yard and a truck route without curbs or sidewalks, it's become a 50-50 mix of residences on a mix of both studios and even family-oriented 4-bedroom units. So 50-50 mix of residential and creative office. And the office, all of the above, mix the rehab of the original taxi garage and new, very contemporary buildings that now, all of which include glass roll-up garage doors in homage to the place's roots. And I think those roll-up doors, this place killed it during the pandemic. They had all this fresh air. But it's also was seen as a really deliberately anti-corporate, anti the typical glass sheathed office building. At the groundbreaking for this project, the developers lit a cubicle on fire, making it quite clear what their intentions were. The big amenity on the site is the shipping container swimming pool. They have the on-site cafe is a heritage food incubator. There are just no chain stores here, but it has triggered 27 more projects in the area, new transit, sidewalks, and curbs on the streets. I mean, it's really had a tremendous impact. So now the last challenge, improving public health, is perhaps the most multifaceted and relies on improvements to all of the other challenges. Suffice it to say that suburban sprawl and human sprawl, obesity, correlate. Obesity increases vulnerability to COVID, diabetes, and heart disease, the top killers, alongside car crashes. We greatly need to retrofit the suburbs to encourage more physical activity, safer streets, reduced stress, especially from income insecurity, and we also need more access to parks and cleaner air, as Gil's as this webinar series has, I think, often really shown us. And I hope that you recognize that already in the projects I've shown, you sort of see all of these kind of healthier activities in place. I'm going to close with a project that does many of these things, but also takes on the more recent health concern that Gil mentioned, the loneliness epidemic. Loneliness is when it's at chronic levels, is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It was already at epidemic levels pre-pandemic, and that the pandemic accelerated that. This redevelopment of a dead cinemaplex into a movie theater anchored mixed-use town center does a great job of inviting people to engage with their community in two ways. And it was a very deliberate response to the loneliness epidemic. Number one, activating the streets with fine-grained boutique retail and restaurants at the ground level, and then putting the big floor plate Target store, parking, offices, or movie theaters above. So fine-grained at the street level, and then you still get the sort of suburban big box stuff above. And then the second thing they did was activate their little 1-acre AstroTurf town green with an LED screen on the side of the theater that provides programming all day long. They'll do the yoga classes. It's a cost-effective way to program that gathering space with yoga classes in the morning, parent and kid and toddler classes in mid-morning, office workers at lunch, lots of after-school activities in the afternoons, and every local sports game kind of in the evenings. I see a lot of these heavily programmed town greens in suburban retrofits. This one, I think, is really smart, the way they're doing it with the big screen. But I think, as the reason why we're putting in these programmed town greens is that generally people in suburbia have plenty of access to leafy green. What they need in a park is access to other people. So I'm going to go last slide. I hope I've given you a taste of the variety of ways we are and need to continue to retrofit suburbia. I hope you also see how the best examples layer solutions to multiple challenges. So a few final kind of lessons learned about what distinguishes the successful retrofits from the failed ones that never quite launched. Number one, community engagement is essential. And what I've seen so often, quite surprisingly, is that the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard folks, can be converted to YIMBYs, yes in my backyard, through good design that celebrates the public realm and provides tax revenue that maintains aging infrastructure. Number two, at the project and municipal scale, communities tend to respond best when you combine redevelopment, reinhabitation, and regreening. You're helping that project. The redevelopment sort of connects us to the future. The reinhabitation connects us to the past, and the regreening connects us to nature. And you kind of hit all members of the community. But note, not all of these strategies work everywhere or nearly as quickly as one might hope. There are lots of failed retrofit proposals in my database. Usually the failures have to do with financing, either not enough willingness of the public sector to invest in the infrastructure, or too much public sector wishful thinking. Lots of fine lines there. And then the third lesson is that communities really should make it both easier to produce urban form and harder to build suburban form. Lots of communities try to encourage the urban form, but they don't actually hinder the continued reproduction of sprawl. Retrofit your regulations to share the benefits of renewal in suburbia. And with that, I will stop sharing my slides. Thank you very much.
Oh, you have provided so many ideas, so many examples that how this is doable. The last question is just if you have people from all over the US, all over Canada, or many countries around the world, from India and Kenya and others. What would be your call to action? What would be your message? People are here not as an academic exercise, but people want to act. This is not a time for people to be spectators. Sometimes people feel hopeless. How can you help people feel hopeful that a lot of these things can happen and improve, like you mentioned, our health, our climate change, our environment, our economic development? What would you tell people so that they become hopeful and move forward? What is your last message?
I don't want to sound self-serving, but I really do think it's just showing people examples that worked. And that's really what June and I have been doing in our books, is just showing in our talks like this one. So share this talk with more people. Every now and then I'll be researching a case study and I'll interview someone and they'll tell me, well, it happened because I held your book up at a city council meeting and said, no, don't approve what you're about to approve. Look at what this other place has done, and it's here in a book. So I do think just helping spur people's imagination, but also really showing them built projects that happened. It is, just say it is possible. We can do things differently.
Ellen, thank you very, very much. What an amazing presentation. You show not only why we need to retrofit suburbia, because clearly we're not getting enough clean air and clean water, and it's not really ideal for our mental and physical and social health, even for economic development, but we can do it much better. So how to retrofit arterials and neighborhoods and houses and shopping centers and all others. I hope that everybody who's watching, please share this with decision makers, elected officials, city staff, advocates, with the media. Thank you very much, Ellen, and everyone else. I'll see you 2 weeks from now.